I started Operation Orbital, which is the military assistance. I extended it to naval training as well. And I think we're probably going to have to do more of that and see how we can improve the resilience of the remaining boats that the Ukrainian Navy has in terms of surveillance and training in boarding and all the other things you need to be able to do. Finally, I think we ought to look again at how we are spending aid money, in development money in Ukraine. We are giving a lot of bilateral support to Ukraine, but clearly the southeast of Ukraine is now extremely vulnerable if the ports are no longer accessed properly. And these are, as I think you know well, we now know well, these are fairly remote places. They're not easy to access. The airport of Mariupol is closed. The rail links are very fragile now in terms of getting bulk cargoes to the iron foundry we saw today. And the road links aren't that particularly good. And I think there is an area, and there are other services as well, like water to Mariupol. There is an area, I think, that Britain and other countries ought to be looking at. How can we improve the infrastructure of these areas? How can we help work perhaps on the technical side through our consultancies and professional expertise?
And one of the areas where I think, again, we could try to assist is to counter Russian propaganda, with the honourable exception of the Kyiv Post. I know that the media in Ukraine is not as free as it should be. I was very keen to see the BBC World Service expand. They now have a alliance with Hromadske in Ukraine and are putting more resource into broadcasting in the Russian language and Ukrainian. And I think that is an area where, again, Britain has a particular ability to provide help.
You know, as the conflict has evolved, again, I think we need to continue to evolve orbitally, which is why I hope it will get more and more into the naval area. I hope we'll also, by the way, not forget the role of the Air Force and aviation. I stationed Typhoons in Romania as part of NATO's Southern Air Policing mission, not least to give us more surveillance over a large part of the Black Sea, so that we had a better idea as NATO as to what was happening in the Black Sea and the various ship movements and so on, which also affected what was going on with Turkey and the Eastern Mediterranean. I think we need to look at that again as well. But yes, I hope that Orbital will be extended beyond 2020. I think there's widespread support for it in Parliament, that it is one of the best things that we do. But the actual, the type of training it covers should be, I think the jargon would say, demand-led. It should come, from the Ukrainian armed forces to be sure that what we provide is needed. We ought to be ready to offer more. Throughout my meetings with Minister Poltorak and others, I was constantly pressed to offer different types of training and different types of equipment, some of which, of course, we didn't have. The United States was more ready to supply. But there was originally a nervousness about us supplying, not on my part, but on the part of certain, it was a coalition government then, but on behalf of certain members of the National Security Council, against supplying weapons that were overtly offensive. I never quite saw this distinction that providing sniper training might be wrong, but counter-sniper training might be acceptable. I never quite saw the distinction between those two things. And again, in my time, I fought to widen the list of equipment that we could supply. And I hope we'll continue to keep this under review, not least because the United States has just announced, subject to congressional approval, that it will be supplying a fresh batch of equipment. I think some $10 million has just been announced. So I hope we will be able to look at that again.
Because there is also, you probably also hear this message frequently, and that's there's no safe Europe without a safe Ukraine. And we constantly hear these days that Ukraine is becoming NATO's eastern flank. So it seems to be in our interest to strengthen Ukraine's security very much.
Well, I agree with that. Ukraine is not a member of NATO, but equally, we should not allow President Putin to have any kind of veto as to who should join the membership application process. Montenegro has just joined, and it's wholly wrong that we should accept that President Putin should try to stop other countries in the Western Balkans, for example, from joining. But Ukraine is a European country. Ukraine is our neighbour in Europe, and it's very important, given the agreements that Russia has signed as the successor state to the Soviet Union. It has obligations under the Helsinki Final Act. Russia has obligations under the Budapest agreements, a whole series of agreements to respect the territorial integrity of Ukraine, and we have to keep them to that.
And I think that a few years ago, particularly around the time of the outbreak of the fighting in Donbass, there were people in Britain who said, well, what's it got to do with us? Awareness in Britain has increased dramatically. We are obviously familiar now with cyber attack from Russia. We are seeing Russian disinformation, but obviously most recently the attack on the Skripals with Novichok poisoning, which led to the British death of a British citizen. So I think the awareness of Russian aggression and the recognition of the importance of countering it has become much stronger in the UK.
Yes, you could almost put it the other way around. We expected the rest of the world, the rest of Europe, to react very quickly when a British subject was killed in Salisbury. We demanded diplomats be expelled, sanctions be looked at again, and so on. Here we have hundreds of Ukrainians dying and being wounded in defense of their own country. We not only should respect that, but we do need to accept that we have a wider responsibility as well. And NATO itself to consider whether the standing maritime groups that it has can't be deployed more regularly in the Black Sea. I think that would be welcomed right across the Black Sea. It's not a particularly stable region of the world. And I think that is something that NATO should consider. NATO put a lot of emphasis onto its northeast flank. We've deployed troops now in Estonia and the other Baltic states and in Poland. But it's very important to see NATO security as a 360-degree security and to look at the southeast and the south as well as the northeast.